Morris Jessup, a distinguished scientist and author of The Case for the UFO, received a strange letter at his Miami home. Written on hotel notepaper and postmarked Gainesville, Texas, the letter was a long, rambling scrawl written in different colored pens and pencils. Its language was arcane and, in places, barely literate. But its contents were sensational. The writer claimed that in the autumn of 1943, the US destroyer Eldridge, while in dock in Philadelphia, was at the flick of a switch rendered invisible. Moments later, the ship is supposed to have appeared 300 miles away in Norfolk, Virginia. Then, just as mysteriously, vanished again, materializing within minutes back in Philadelphia. Was what became known as the Philadelphia experiment merely the product of someone's overactive imagination, or did it really happen? The bizarre letter was the second Jessup had received. The first, 3 months earlier, did not mention the Eldridge, but discussed at length the levitation of massive objects and the use of anti-gravity to transport them through time and space. Both letters were signed Carlos Miguel Allende. Jessup had initially dismissed them as the work of a crank, but he was intrigued. His book on UFOs had been published the year before in 1955 and was considered an intelligent and reasonably credible view on how an as-yet undiscovered principle of anti-gravity might be used to cause things to vanish and reappear elsewhere. Jessup began to wonder if there was more to the strange letters than met the eye. He knew that during the Second World War, the US military had conducted all kinds of top-secret experiments. Perhaps Allende had witnessed some strange occurrence. Jessup decided to send Allende a postcard, asking if he had any evidence with which to substantiate his incredible allegations. Busy on a new book, Jessup thought no more about it. Nearly 5 months later, in May 1956, he received a third letter from Allende. It was just as cryptic and just as strangely written as the others. Although unable to produce any tangible proof, Allende repeated his claims that the Eldridge had vanished from Philadelphia and reappeared a short time later after a brief sighting in Norfolk. Allende, who said he'd witnessed the whole thing from a nearby ship, claimed that the experiment had had a devastating effect on the Eldridge crew, with half of them suffering mental. Jessup couldn't tell if Allende's story was an elaborate hoax or not. He decided to forget the whole thing. And there the matter might have rested, had it not been for the intervention of the US Office of Naval Research, or ONR, in Washington, D.C. In the summer of 1955, some time before the strange letters to Jessup, an anonymous package marked Happy Easter arrived at the ONR. The package contained a copy of Jessup's book. Many of the passages were marked and the margins filled with notes on teleportation, magnetic fields, telepathy, and cosmic rays. At the time, the US military placed a high priority on anti-gravity research. As he tried to make sense of the annotations, Major Darrell Ritter, the ONR case officer, wondered if its anonymous sender had inadvertently stumbled across some top-secret project. He decided to hand the book over to Commander George Hoover, a prominent member of the ONR Project Orbiter Committee, which was closely involved in anti-gravity research. In the spring of 1957, Jessup was invited to Washington. As soon as he saw the book, he knew immediately that the notes in it had been made by the same person who'd sent him the strange letters. The Navy's interest in the matter convinced Jessup that Allende's allegations concerning the Eldridge were perhaps not so far-fetched after all. When copies of the book were printed and circulated in senior government and military circles, Jessup worried that perhaps he already knew too much about something which had been covered up for the last 14 years. Towards the end of October 1958, Jessup went to New York to see his friend Ivan Sanderson, a prominent naturalist. Over dinner, he told his host and 2 other guests he wished to speak with them privately. Jessup produced one of his annotated books and asked them to read it and lock it away. He was highly agitated, saying that he was certain something terrible was about to happen to him. Jessup then returned home to Florida. Within a few days, he was involved in a serious car accident. It took him weeks to recover. After that, his state of mind deteriorated rapidly. In April 1959, he wrote to one of his oldest friends, Long John Nebel, a New York TV talk show host, saying he intended to kill himself. On the 20th of April, Jessup was due to have dinner with another friend, Dr. Manson Valentine. He said that after a great deal of research, he'd reached some startling and terrifying conclusions about the Philadelphia experiment, which he wanted to share with him. At 6:30 p.m., he was discovered in his car, barely breathing. A hose was attached to the exhaust pipe. Despite frantic efforts to revive him, Jessup died within a few minutes. It looked like suicide. Later, rumors began to circulate that though he was known to have been depressed, he had in fact been murdered to prevent him from revealing what he knew about the Philadelphia experiment.